This is a lecture for the discipline Stylistics. It is being delivered for the students studying for the specialty Foreign Language to Foreign Languages for the Department of English and German Languages. The theme of this lecture is Functional Styles. This lecture will include the following points. First of all, we'll consider the definition of functional style and its characteristic features, and we'll talk a little bit about the classification of functional styles. And then we'll consider each functional style in more detail, such as the Bilateral style, the Publicistic functional style, the newspaper functional style, the scientific prose style, and the official documents functional style. We should note that there are many different definitions of the functional style. We have pointed out the most important here. World-famous Soviet linguist Vinogradov defines functional style as having social relevance, functionally determined, displaying in a coherent combination of ways of usage, choice, and combination of means of speech communication in the domain of a certain national language, correlated with other ways of expression of the same type, which attain other aims and fulfill other functions in the social communicative experience of the people. Kozhina defines functional style in a shorter way as the arrangement of language means in speech in the text, built up as the result appearance of the principles of language means, choice, and combination in a certain sphere of communication in accordance with the tasks and conditions of communication. Galperin, who is considered to be the expert in stylistics, states that a functional style is a patterned variety of literary text characterized by the greater or lesser typification of its constituents, supraphrasal units, in which the choice and arrangement of interdependent and interwoven language media are calculated to secure the purport of the communication. Distinctive features of any functional style depend on its social purpose and the combination of functions of language prevailing in the act of communication. That is, on the sphere and the aims of communication. It is generally accepted that the communicative and the cognitive functions of the language are realized in scientific prose. All the rest are optional. Each functional style may be characterized by a number of distinctive features: leading or subordinate, constant or changing, obligatory or optional. But most linguists say that each functional style is a relatively stable system at the given period in the development of the literary language, but it changes, and sometimes considerably, from one period to another. Therefore, functional style of a language is a historical category. The development of each style is predetermined by the changes in the norms of standard English. Thus, the functional style of emotive prose actually began to function as an independent style after the second half of the 16th century. The newspaper style budded off from the publicistic style. The rhetorical style has undergone considerable fundamental changes, and so was with other functional styles. If we speak about the classification of functional styles, First of all, we should see that there exist a number of classifications, and some of them are quite different, but most of them are similar. In a generalized way, the most common one includes 5 functional styles. Each functional style is subdivided in a number of substyles. They represent varieties of the abstract invariant. Each variety has basic features common to all varieties of the given functional style and peculiar features typical of this variety alone. So most linguists, including Alpering, point out 5 functional styles, such as the Bilateral functional style, which includes substyles as poetry, motive, prose, and drama. The second, publicistic functional style, including oratory, essays, articles in newspapers and magazines. The third, the newspaper functional style, brief news items, advertisements and announcements, headlines. The scientific prose style, which includes the substyles as exact sciences and humanitarian sciences, and the functional style of official documents. Each style can be recognized by one or more leading features which are especially conspicuous. For instance, the use of special terminology is a lexical characteristic of the style of scientific prose, and one by which it can be easily recognized. Now we'll consider each functional style that we have pointed before in more detail. First of all, we'll discuss the Bilateral functional style. According to Galperin, this is a generic term for 3 substyles: the language of poetry, emotive prose, the language of fiction, and the language of the drama. Each of these substyles has certain common features, and each of them possesses some individuality. The common features of the substyles are the following: the aesthetic cognitive function, a function which aims at the cognitive process, which secures the gradual unfolding of the idea to the reader, and at the same time calls forth a feeling of pleasure and satisfaction which a reader experiences because he is able to penetrate into the author's idea and to form his own conclusions. A vocabulary which will reflect to a certain degree the author's personal evaluation of things or phenomena. A peculiar individual selection of vocabulary and syntax. The introduction of the typical features of colloquial language to a full degree in the drama, to a lesser degree in prose, and to a slight degree in poetry. In short, Bilateral style is highly emotional, subjective, and expressive. It has its own specific function to impress the reader aesthetically. Its function is aesthetic cognitive on the one hand, and receiving pleasure on the other. The publicistic style of language became a separate style in the middle of the 18th century. Unlike other styles, it has 2 spoken varieties, namely the rhetorical substyle and the radio and TV commentary. The other 2 substyles are the essay, moral, philosophical, literary, and journalistic articles, political, social, economic. The general aim of publicistic style is to influence the public opinion, to convince the reader or the listener that the interpretation given by the writer or the speaker is the only correct one, and to cause him to accept the expressed point of view. Publicistic style is characterized by a coherent and logical syntactical structure, with an expanded system of connectives and careful paragraphing. Its emotional appeal is achieved by the use of words with the emotive meaning, but the stylistic devices are not fresh or genuine. The typical features of this style are direct address to the audience, sometimes contractions, and the use of colloquial words. The newspaper functional style. English newspaper writing dates from the 17th century. The first of any regular English newspapers was the Weekly News, which first appeared in May 1622. The early English newspaper was principally a vehicle of information. Commentary found its way into the newspapers later, but as far back as the middle of the 18th century, the British newspaper was very much like what it is today, carrying foreign and domestic news, advertisements, announcements, and articles containing comments. Newspaper style has its specific features, such as special political and economic terms, newspaper cliches, it is stereotyped expressions, commonplace phrases familiar to the reader, abbreviations, news items, press reports, and headlines. Some abbreviations are read as words, and they are called acronyms. For example, NATO, which stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exploring Countries, or AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. The next style we are going to discuss is the scientific prose style. The features of scientific style. The language of science is governed by the aim of the functional style of scientific prose, which is to prove a hypothesis, to create new concepts, to disclose the internal laws of existence, development, relations between different phenomena. The language means used, therefore, tend to be objective, precise, unemotional, devoid of any individuality. There is a striving for the most generalized form of expression. The next feature is use of terms and learned words, impersonality, and generalized form of expression, reflected in the choice of grammar and syntactic constructions. The general vocabulary employed in scientific prose bears its direct referential meaning. That is, words used in scientific prose will always tend to be used in their primary logical meaning. Hardly a single word will be found here, which, in contrast to the Bilateral style, is used in more than one meaning. Nor will there be any words with contextual meaning. Even the possibility of ambiguity is avoided. Furthermore, terms are coined so as to be self-explanatory to the greatest possible degree. But in spite of this, a new term in scientific prose is generally followed or preceded by an explanation. The next feature is the logical sequence of utterances, most developed system of connectives, accepted sentence patterns. The logical sequence of utterances with clear indication of their interrelations and interdependence. It will not be an exaggeration to say that in no other functional style do we find such a developed and varied system of connectives as in scientific prose. Sentence patterns are of three types: postulatory, argumentative, and formulative. A hypothesis or a forecast must be based on facts already known, on facts systematized and defined. Therefore, every piece of scientific prose will begin with postulatory pronouncements which are taken as self-evident and needing no proof. A reference to these facts is only preliminary to the exposition of the writer's ideas, and is therefore summed up in precisely formulated statements accompanied, if considered necessary, by references to sources. And one more feature of this style is, of course, use of quotations and references, use of footnotes, both of the reference kind. And the last style, but not the least style, we are to consider within this lecture is the style of official documents. There is one more style of language within the field of standard literary English, which has become singled out, and that is the style of official documents, or officialese, as it is sometimes called. This functional style is not homogeneous and is represented by the following substyles or variants: diplomatic documents, the language of business letters, the language of military documents, and the language of legal documents. The main aim of this type of communication is to state the conditions binding two parties in an undertaking. These parties may be the state and the citizen, or citizen and the citizen, a society and its members, two or more enterprises or bodies, two or more governments, a person in authority and a subordinate, a board or presidium and an assembly or general meeting. The aim of communication in this style of language is to reach agreement between two contracting parties. The main features are use of words in logical dictionary meaning, special system of cliches, terms, set expressions, use of terminological nomenclature, no emotive words retaining their original meaning, special obligatory forms of address, opening and concluding, encoded character of language, use of abbreviations and conventional symbols, and fixed paragraphing. This is all in short concerning each functional style. As usual, you are suggested to answer this comprehension question to check if you have obtained correctly the content of the lecture. And surely you are suggested the list of these sources for further reading. Thank you for your attention.